In Hungary, we had more than 30 Jeremy funds. None of them exist today, and none of them can show up even one single proper portfolio company. Half of the money was pretty much stolen, and half of that was mistreated and just not invested with a venture mindset. Yeah, I think ambition level is the number one thing to tackle. I often see startups starting to focusing on the local and regional market just because there is a 10x more funded competitor on the market in Western Europe or the US. That sort of ambition level, I think, is the biggest problem in the mindset.
I always thought that we shouldn't be measuring the success of an ecosystem depending on the outliers. It should be measured by the successful companies which we can create on a systemic level.
Yeah, I agree with you in that, but I also disagree a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think it's crucial to have outlier successes, to have kind of your Skype effect.
Oh yeah.
We are a big believer in this kind of flywheel effect, and that's the biggest engine of growth of an ecosystem. So, if there is like a big outlier success, that will create potentially dozens or hundreds of wealthy people who can give back, become angel investors, become second-time funders.
Hello, Recursive community. Our next guest, Csongor Biás, the Managing Director of Startup Hungary, an initiative dedicated to accelerating the growth of Hungary's startup ecosystem. With his extensive experience in the startup scene, he is an active angel investor and has worked with venture capital firms and accelerators. Csongor also played a key role as a country manager in launching Vacuumlabs operations in Budapest. Alongside with 12 startup founders, Csongor focuses now on strengthening Hungary's entrepreneurial landscape. Csongor, welcome to the Recursive podcast. We have seen each other, I think, a couple of years ago when you brought me back to Budapest. Thank you for doing that. I was very impressed by the conference that you back then helped organize. And I think many people still associate you also with Untold Stories. I really love the concept of it. But still, how long has it been now that you have been working on the community building aspect, on developing the startup ecosystem in Hungary?
It's more than 10 years now. I think it was started 12 years ago in 2012, back at one of the first, or maybe even the first Pioneers Festival. Back then, I was working as a in the software development firm as a marketer and a little bit of a product manager. The core business was more like dev shop and agency work, but that company actually wanted to create like an internal product, kind of like a spin-off. And me as a junior marketer, fresh out of university, was tasked to figure out how to do that. And back then, I think it was very popular to launch a startup. A year ago, the Social Network movie came out. Eric Ries just published the Lean Startup book. So you could read about startups everywhere and you could feel that kind of energy. And I convinced my boss to send me to the Pioneers Festival. Before that, I bought all the literature that I could. And I was so amazed that that platform back then was able to bring together all the regional innovation hubs as well as some Western European US speakers. So I was able to see Mike Siebel on stage from YC and other big thought leaders from the space. And back there, I decided that I want to create similar stuff in Hungary because I think it can really boost the ecosystem. It was that time when Prezi and Ustream and all the kind of first generational Hungarian success stories started to take off. And I wanted to replicate that. And I figured that if I bring together people, bring international speakers, do community stuff, I can accelerate that and also accelerate my career growth and my network. So since then, I've been doing similar stuff, wearing multiple hats. First, I worked for an early stage VC fund / accelerator called iCatapult, which was pretty much the first in Hungary. We were able to take startups with us to the US for small business development trips. And we also kind of had like a roadshow around the region, which was kind of essential in building my core network. Did similar stuff in Design Terminal. Then I teamed up with the Fiedler Capital guys, and we actually launched the co-working space. I wouldn't say similar to this because it was much smaller, but in mentality, I think it was a little bit similar to Puzzle. It was that place where actually some of the currently most successful, most valuable companies just started off, like Xeon, Bitrise, Turbine. These companies were 2-3 people teams. Now they are post Series B, hundreds of people, operations in the US. So I was lucky enough to work alongside and work together with all these people and to witness these crazy startup growth and journeys from a close distance.
So you pretty much brought like 10 years or 12 years of very versatile experiences into a couple of minute presentation. Thank you. But I'll still actually ask you how the ecosystem developed over time since you started. I just realized that probably our paths have crossed already 10 years ago. I remember 2014 was actually my first Pioneers Festival. And I was so impressed because I wasn't part of the startup community before that. And for the first time, I experienced a totally different mindset of, supporting each other, collaboration, of, being optimistic, being even, on the verge of delusional when I talked to founders. And it was I felt so charged, I felt so invigorated by this space that I could pretty much, with a very high percentage of certainty, say that this is why I'm still part of these startup communities. It is the Pioneers Festival. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It was a phenomenon at this point, I think, in our part of the world.
Absolutely. It was a core memory for me too.
Wow.
I decided a lot of things back then. I was very conscious after that everything we do in terms of community building and organizing events, we always have to use English. And that was kind of coming from Pioneers, because I figured that if we do everything in English, it's going to be accessible not just for the Hungarians, but also for expats, for foreign visitors. So that this is kind of like a core principle, how you make your ecosystem more accessible internationally.
And more inclusive also, yeah. Because I think when it comes to developing an innovation ecosystem, it doesn't necessarily involve always people with the same background. Actually, you do need people with versatile background, and that would mean also people with a versatile ethnic background. If you look at the strongest innovation hubs around the world, they are a magnet for people coming from different cultures, speaking different languages. What unites them is, I guess, a global vision for the ventures, for their businesses. That became the foundation for your own vision, for your own career path back then. I wonder, how did it come later on to Startup Hungary? When did you decide to found the organization, and what was the initial mission of Startup Hungary?
Yeah, I think it was around 2019 when we started to prepare it. I've been doing very similar community roles before with the VC fund, accelerators, co-working spaces. I also worked for, as you mentioned in the intro, for Vacuumlabs as a country manager. But my heart was always at building communities. And funny enough, actually, it was Google who approached me that they could do kind of like an anchor funding, an anchor sponsorship for organizations like Startup Hungary, as they do all around the region. And if I wanted to start working on this. And I took on the opportunity and basically initially invited 12 people to our funder board to kick off the initiative. I think it was a very important core principle that the organization needs to be grassroots and funder-led. So I wanted to invite the local role models, the been there, done that type of people.
Who were the local role models back then?
I think obviously the founders of Prezi, Ustream, Balabit, NNG, founders of Distinction, which was acquired by Skyscanner. So mostly the post-exit founders and those who raised post-Series A funding from international well-known investors who were kind of visible on a global level or international, or at least regional level. Those people are, I believe, the role models. But that 12 people funder board today have expanded to more than 40 people. And we also have the second gen success stories like the founders of Sion, Shaper 3D, Colossian, Turbine. So pretty much all the internationally recognizable founders. And all these funders publicly pledged to support the organization, but also to do annual donations, small financial donations.
Cool.
So 30% of our funding comes from these funder contributions, which is very important. So it's not just the nonprofit governance, what is funder-led, but actually the financials also.
Yeah.
So we can keep our funder-centric approach. And obviously we have a lot of corporate partners like Google, Microsoft, Citi, a bunch of local VCs like Day One, Portfolio and Lead Ventures, even some international VCs like 500 Emerging Europe decided to support our mission. And yeah, you asked about the mission.
What was the mission and how?
The mission is the mission is to have more and better startups in Hungary. That's kind of the short. And of course, we spent quite a lot of time to define what we mean by a startup, what we mean by better, and what we mean by more. And yeah, we are pretty strict with our startup definition because I think in our region and in our domestic ecosystem, it's often blurry and often confusing what we call like a truly venture scale startup and what we call more like a digital SMB.
Yeah.
Which can be a totally great business, but I think a startup, a high growth startup should have three components: an innovative product or business model, a scalable business model, and to be able to grow fast.
Yeah.
And lastly, but most importantly, like a global vision for world domination. In that sense, having like a copycat business and focusing on the domestic market can be a really nice business and can create a tons of value. But in my eyes, that's not really a startup. Because of our fragmented region, I think like true startups should aim for big, large, homogeneous markets.
It is a blessing and a curse because I guess having a small domestic market forces you to think about going international much earlier than if you were, I don't know, stuck in developing or selling your product in the domestic market, in a big domestic market. And I guess from the success stories that we have seen in Central and Eastern Europe, most of them were those who embraced this going international as early as possible. They weren't necessarily focusing on dominating the local market before they decided to do the next step.
Exactly.
And over the time, this is how they learned also to scale more efficiently and faster and more successfully outside of the region. Because I think this is one of the big problems that we have in Europe in general. It's the fragmented market. It is the different cultures, the different languages, the different legal frameworks, and so on and so forth. In this sense, I've seen also similar structures and organizations like Startup Hungary or in each of the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, but they usually have a different focus. Like, I think in Bulgaria, the BESC organization is much more focused on defending the interests of the startup world in front of institutions, in front of when it comes to regulatory and legal framework that we operate in. Is this something that you do as well? Are you
a bit? We are not
a
the best.
Okay.
We are not the best in this, but we achieved some results. So I would say we have three main pillars. One is kind of shaping the wide audience and wide public's opinion and mindset about startups. And we use open events for that, PR, content marketing. The second pillar is more like a hands-on support for the startups. And we have our workshops, our membership programs, our funder dinners, mastermind sessions. And the third, what you are talking about, is more like a policy advocacy kind of area where we help policymakers, legislators to shape a more startup-friendly environment. For that, we need partners. We were lucky enough to build a good relationship with one of the innovation ministry, who was kind of our one-stop shop. Although we've been very critical about the government and some of their actions in the startup world, especially to public funding, they listened to our opinion, which was that they should focus much more on the regulatory side rather than on the funding side. And with them and many pro bono legal firms, we were able to push through some regulatory changes around ESOPs and convertible loans, which was pretty difficult to do in Hungary, not anymore. But sometimes, to be honest with you, I am concerned how much effort should we put into this, because what we see that even that there is very important milestones, we still cannot really recommend the local startup to start as a Hungarian entity. Most of the successful startups, what we talked about before,
Yes.
have flipped. So they open these holdco structures, either at the seed or series round, but we are seeing this more and more frequently, that they just start right off as a US entity, as a Delaware C Corp,
Yeah.
and maybe create this kind of holdco structure where they have all the IP and the investors in the US Delaware C Corp, and they also create a subsidiary here to hire and employ the local workforce.
Which are the main challenges that founders struggle with when it comes to, I don't know, setting up or operating a Hungarian entity, let's say a joint stock company from Hungary?
Yeah, so to be honest, like the most common Hungarian entity type is a Kft, which is like an LLC, a little bit sillier than a German GmbH, and in that you don't even have like proper shares. You have these weird quotas, and to most of the investment vehicles and investment agreements were pretty much optimized for the Anglo-Saxon legal system. So it's just not really aligned with the KFT. And to achieve certain instruments, you need to do this kind of legal lawyer magic tricks, and it results
gymnastics,
results to very complicated term sheets, which is not really understandable for like a foreign investor. So whenever like a foreign investor comes in, they would require you to flip. And even like leading Hungarian VCs, they also prefer to do the flip right away, and they are familiar obviously with the local legal system, but they prefer to have your company in a holdco structure and to actually invest in a UK limited Estonian company even, or most often like a US Delaware C Corp, where you can use those standards that are internationally well known and understood. But over that, I think it's also day-to-day administrations, like what kind of invoicing software you can use. In Hungary, if you are running your startup as a Hungarian entity, you can only use that invoicing softwares, which is like looped into the tax authorities, so only like Hungarian providers, which is not really the best for like a SaaS company that needs to use modern tools, and many other things like day-to-day operations.
Okay. Lately, there has been a lot of discussion around the idea of EU Inc.
Yeah.
I wonder how Startup Hungary stands in this regard. What is your position?
So I was Andreas Klinger, one of the co-initiators, is a good friend. Actually, he became a good friend at the first Pioneers Festival, so we go way back. I see everything is connected.
Yes.
And I really respect his work, trying to support it as much as I possibly can. Actually, we hosted an event with him in Brussels, where we connected him with some EU policymakers, MEPs, and other startup organizations to have them aligned. It resonates very well. I think he's advocating for a pan-European entity that would unify basically investment standards and create the chance for any European startup to use that single entity. And based on that, we could actually unify ESOP schemes, employee laws, and a lot of other things, which would significantly reduce this friction and fragmentation. Huge fan of the initiative, and I think it's a great momentum to push. It's amazing that only in 1 week, the petition got more than 10,000 signatures from funders like the Stripe funders, Depot, Wise, Bolt, and many other unicorns and decacorns of Europe, as well as leading investors like Sequoia, Crown Dome, even Paul Graham of Y Combinator signed it. So there is a huge momentum. I think also from the policy side, it very much resonates with the Draghi report, and the new there is a new commissioner responsible for startups for the first time ever. A couple of days ago, there was a hearing from her, and she even mentioned that many other startup organizations are also advocating for this. And I believe that this should be the first and most important cause that we fight for on the European level. Yeah, big fan of his work, and I hope they can make it happen.
Do you think that there is potential for the startup associations also across the region or even across Europe to have a united position when it comes to topics like EU Inc. or even other topics which are going to support the growth of innovative ventures in Europe? Do you have a common language? Do you have common platforms where you can also discuss possible solutions? Even, now with the Draghi report, I think we have to be much more part of the discussion how solutions could look like to the challenges that Europe is facing.
Yeah, we are part of a few platforms. There is one called Allied for Startups, which is a Brussels lobby initiative, including many startup organizations. We are also advisory board member there. There is also European Startup Network and actually a bunch of others. I think these are great. Sometimes I feel that they sometimes lack a little bit of a funder mindset. And some, there are great associations, but some of them more and some of them are less funder-centric.
Yeah.
There are associations who are more expert on EU projects and grants, and they bring in a lot of very different perspective. But as you said, diversity is always conductive. So we try to bring in the funder-centric mindset as much as possible to these discussions, and I think that's important.
I'm curious, as an organization that is actually aiming for impact on the startup ecosystem, just like us,
Yeah.
That was our mission, or our mission is very close to what your mission is. I wonder, how do you measure your success? Which are the KPIs that you would be looking at? How do you know that the job you're doing makes sense or is bringing the startup ecosystem further?
Yeah, we're thinking about this a lot. Currently, our KPI is to get more startups ready for like an international Series A level. So pretty much to funding stages. Of course, that's not the perfect KPI because there can be great bootstrap companies as well. Yeah. But this is the best what we figured out so far. Obviously, if we would attach this KPI to like a revenue that's also different for a SaaS company that has an ARR to like a marketplace, which has a different unit economics, margins, and everything. So yeah, pretty much we measure ourselves based on like proper international Series A rounds. That's what we believe we can help the companies most. And after their A rounds, especially after their B rounds, it's more like they can help us, and our job is to attract them to our platform so they can give back and give advice and give their community engagement to inspire and support the others following their footsteps.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we can speak of unicorns as a vanity metric quite often, which is also seen as a sign of the strength of an ecosystem. But quite often the unicorns are supposed to be the outliers. Now with, the list is probably around 900. I don't know.
Like globally?
Globally, yeah. I don't know if it makes sense to speak of unicorn companies anymore, and I guess most of them have been devaluated after the corrections that we saw in the market. But in any case, I always thought that we shouldn't be measuring the success of an ecosystem depending on the outliers. It should be measured by the successful companies which we can create on a systemic level, like the companies who are in the median, the companies who are like the average, how successful are they? And I guess we can look at funding, we can look at, percentage of the GDP that they're contributing to, but it's very complex, especially for global businesses who are not even based in the home countries, if we can call them like this.
Yeah, I agree with you in that, but I also disagree a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think it's crucial to have outlier successes, to have kind of your Skype effect.
Oh, yeah.
We are a big believer in this kind of flywheel effect. and that's the biggest engine of growth of an ecosystem. So, if there is like a big outlier success, that will create potentially dozens or hundreds of wealthy people who can give back, become angel investors, become second-time funders. But even more importantly, these outlier successes can change the culture and the mindset, and suddenly people will realize that there is no reason why not to be brave enough to think bigger, because you can see from your peers that it's possible. I give you an example. Currently in Hungary, I think if you start a startup and you want to hire engineers, they don't really appreciate that much of the ESOP programs and the shares. They believe it's nice to have, but everybody wants to be compensated in cash. It's a very different story in Estonia, where they have 10 unicorns, because any kind of engineers probably have 3 or 4 friends from the technical university who got the millionaire, who became a millionaire from ESOP programs.
Yeah.
So it's more believable for them to trust in that. And you need kind of those outlier successes to have them. So I think, it's a dispute where I have a pretty strong opinion, like what means more for an ecosystem, one unicorn outcome or 100 million outcome. I believe one unicorn outcome can mean more because of their capability to change the culture, to show that it's possible to think even bigger and to have more ambition. It also attracts more international interest to the ecosystem. So that's why we are optimizing, actually producing outlier successes and to change the culture in that direction, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I think unicorns have the potential to change the narrative that we tell ourselves and the narrative that we also tell to the world, definitely. That's why I'm also in storytelling. When you think about it, it is exactly the philosophy that gives the foundation for the Recursive and similar businesses.
I think for Startup Hungary too, one of our most effective tool and method is to just amplify the stories of these role models to strengthen their role model status. So we have somebody to follow. That's our biggest job.
I still wonder which are maybe the blocks in the mindset of, let's say, a Hungarian founder that you see, which are standing in the way of, building a truly global company. I do know that there are also formal challenges that founders are facing. But when it comes to the mindset, what do you think needs to, change, or do we need to overcome in our region so that we start building unicorns or $10 million businesses in a systemic way?
Yeah, I think ambition level is the number one thing to tackle. I often see startups starting to focusing on the local and regional market just because there is a 10x more funded competitor on the market in Western Europe or the US. Whereas we were able to see many cases where the underdog was able to win, essentially. When Shaper 3D was started, they had companies with 100 times more funding at the pre-seed seed stage. None of those competitors exist anymore, and it's them who are actually reshaping the market. They were brave enough to not to care with that and be customer focused, have a very strong opinion on how they want to approach the global market. And I believe that not many funders have that kind of confidence or maybe naivete to do that. And that sort of ambition level, I think, is the biggest problem in the mindset.
Interesting. Okay. How do you think is Hungary performing compared to other countries in Central and Eastern Europe? Where do you stand?
Yeah, I think, we were talking about the early days of the ecosystem, 2010-ish, 15-ish years. Back then, there were 4 unicorns in the region, if you take CE and the Baltics. And actually, one of them was kind of Hungarian. It's disputable how Hungarian it was. It had a Hungarian co-founder. I'm talking about Logmin, which went public, I think, back in 2009 on the New York Stock Exchange. And the Hungarian founder, Anka Márton, he left the company pretty early. but to this day, they have a huge development center in Budapest. So that was one unicorn out of the four. And this statistic is before the market correction, so there might be less, but I think in 2023, Atomico, Credo, and Deerum report, they said there are more than 50 unicorns in the region, and Hungary didn't produce any more. Back then, I think when Logmin went public and Prezi opened an office in San Francisco and Ustream raised from SoftBank, it was not common from the region to pull that off.
Yes.
So in a way, they were pioneers in this to show that the kind of what I like to call cross-Atlantic operation, where they have the business units and commercial units in the US and keep the R&D and product units in their home country. They kind of pioneered that way from the region. There were obviously a couple of other companies like Telerik in Bulgaria, I think is the same age pretty much, and obviously Skype and others. But Hungary was on the top. And everybody believed that we can replicate this in a big volume. And of course, there are many second generation companies whose success already exceed maybe not Logme's, but Ustream's and Prezi's results and achievements. But we could have had more, I believe. So.
But why do you think you couldn't keep the momentum, sustain the momentum? What happened?
I believe government funding is a pretty big reason for that. It had a counterproductive and toxic effect in the local ecosystem because there were, I think, Poland and Hungary was the two countries that received in ratio the most of this kind of public and EU funding programs.
That was back then from the Jeremy program, right?
Yeah, Jeremy program, exactly. So just as a comparison, in Bulgaria, I believe there were only two Jeremy funds, Launch Hub and E111. Both of them exist today and they run from private funding and they achieved great track record. In Hungary, we had more than 30 Jeremy funds. None of them exist today and none of them can show up even one single proper portfolio company. Half of the money was pretty much stolen, and half of that was mistreated and just not invested with a venture mindset. It was banking people, private equity people, and public administration people who were managing these funds. And the money came with a lot of strings attached, like bureaucratical overhead, restriction on what you can spend the money, what you cannot spend the money. So obviously, like this kind of money attracted not the best companies, because the best companies were able to raise from the private investor or from abroad. So only the little bit less quality startups went to these funds. But because these funds had to spend the money, otherwise they would need to send it back to the EU, they invested in not really venture scale startups. And that was a market distraction, and it kind of changed the standards of what is a venture scale company and what is more like a digital SME, what it takes to, how a VC should work, what are the benchmarks, what are the fund stages. It was very artificial and kind of, that was the easy money. So newcomers in the industry started to learn that playbook and not the playbook, which is more like the private and more international sense. And that kind of messed up the ecosystem, I think. And almost you can see like the Hungarian ecosystem as a parallel universe. There are those global mindset companies who tend to avoid these government funds and really shoot for the large international markets. And there are the majority of these kind of, sometimes I call them grant-entrepreneurs, going from easy public funding to the other public funding, but pretty much a lot of zombie companies. And that kind of messed up the ecosystem, I think.
But since then, you probably also created much more completely private VC funds who are, I guess, and they are actually run by partners who already have the entrepreneurial background. And I think this is very important, that part of the team has themselves an entrepreneurial background. They can relate to the reality of a founder. You have a bunch of founders who never wanted to touch, public money because they, as you mentioned, you created your own parallel universe. Do you think that this is now bringing this Hungarian ecosystem back on track?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
And there are certainly proper funds in Hungary.
Yeah.
They tend to invest more in foreign companies than Hungarian, which is fine. Also, there are a lot of regional and even Western European funds that are really eager to do deals in Hungary.
I think they also have now more competition. I've been hearing a lot about Hungary and the Hungarian startups which are not based. From VC funds which are not based here, and they are seeing a certain quality, especially in terms of AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think, like obviously Launch Hub back in Colossian is a great example, and many other kind of cross-regional investments. Credo did a few recent deals here to Axoflow and also Backproof. And there are many others. Of course, Creandum was very, very active. They did Shaper 3D, Sion, and also CraftDocs. So yeah, we pretty much every month we welcome an international VC and we organize them funder dinners and try to help them to find those companies with the international mindset and the right people. It's just there are not that many new startups, but we can definitely see little signs of these flywheel effects taking off. So I'm very glad that I've been having the opportunity to do some angel deals as a scout investor for a large Western European fund. And I was able to back, for example, Mitsu, which was a core data engineering manager at Skyscanner, later at Shaper 3D. Now he's doing his own thing. I also invested in Captivate, which is launched by an ex-VP of sales at Sion. Recently closed another deal. Cannot disclose the name, but that was also like a second-time founder who already sold his company. So you kind of can see this kind of flywheel effect taking off in small, and I'm very bullish about this.
Yeah. Having had conversations with so many founders over the year, being yourself a veteran of community building in not only Hungary, but actually probably in the whole region, I wonder, what do you look for when you invest in a founder?
Yeah, since I invest in the earliest stage, I like to do first check, first round investments. It's mostly the founders, as cliche as it sounds, but I look for founder market fit. So very strong founders with great track record, not necessarily professional track record. I'm not against investing in somebody fresh out of university, but I also look some signals for like an outlier characteristics. I don't know, they had like crazy sport results. They did like weekend projects that achieved a lot. So that kind of grit and that kind of hunger and obsession for success as a personality trait. And the second element of the founder market fit is obviously focusing on a large market and having some sort of like a unique insight on that market that is different for anybody and can put them in a position to do a category defining product.
You will have to excuse me, but I cannot not ask you also a bit of a political question, because right now we are actually having this conversation in a very specific moment in time and in history. Yeah. Today there was the European Political Community Summit here in Budapest. Zelensky was here. And I think probably the future of Europe was being discussed. At the same time, it's just a couple of days after the results of the US elections have been known. Orban was the first to congratulate, I think, Trump. How is this going to affect the development of the startup or the tech ecosystem in Hungary? What do you think? Is it going to be a good thing for you, or are you rather pessimistic? How does it fit, these latest developments? How would you translate them as an impact on the tech ecosystem?
Yeah, to be honest, I have no clue. And I'm a little bit scared even to think about it very deeply. I definitely think that the current political climate has a negative effect on the Hungarian ecosystem, and you can see many good performing, growing scale-ups having a more difficult time raising just because they are coming from Hungary. Investors are afraid of, rule of law, you know, kind of, it's just an extra risk. And I think not just for the startups, also for the VC funds doing fundraising. So that's a big negative effect that you can already feel, and you've been feeling it for the past decade. Just as an example, on Nomad List, Hungary has been for years the first digital nomad destination. You know, the Nomad List website where they rank like digital nomad destination. And now it's kind of the 20th place because of LGBTQ friendliness and some other like political reasons. You know, there was this, we talked about European policy advocacy, there was this Startup Nation Standards and ESMA program. Hungary was the only one that didn't sign out of the 27 European Union countries. The reason why we couldn't convince the government, because out of the 7 standards, one was about diversity and inclusiveness, and our government didn't want to see that. So we decided not to sign. That's also a huge disadvantage, not to be part of that initiative. On the other hand, like I see, I'm not happy about this and the results, don't get me wrong, but there might be benefits also of Trump winning in Hungary, because actually the double taxation treaty between the US and Hungary was expired, and the current government had that strategy to not even engage with conversation with the Biden administration because they wanted to all-in support Trump. So there were not even discussions to prolong it. And it's very questionable what it will mean for those startups that have a US holdco structure.
Of course.
And now I think with Trump winning and Orban betting full on Trump, there is a good chance to fix at least that. So I'm not saying there cannot be benefits, but I think the negatives much more overweight. And obviously the geopolitical risk, I don't have a magic ball to tell you how it will turn, but it's scary as shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that that could be a reason for brain drain happening in Hungary?
Of course. Of course. I have many friends, very talented people who left the country not because of economic, not because of other reasons, just because of political reasons. And it's very sad. And it's a huge loss for the country.
So if you had to maybe redesign the vision of Startup Hungary, what would you wish for that you're going to achieve next? What would you strive for, fight for as an ecosystem builder, as someone who is defending the interests of the startup founders now?
Look, everybody has to fight with their own tools and weapons, right? So I know about startup community building. What I can do is to strengthen the startup community and to build our bubble, because I think there is certainly a bubble in Budapest. There is certainly a bubble in the startup ecosystem. So if this bubble gets stronger, it can convince more people to stay. Startups can create jobs, high-paying, high-valued jobs that are intellectually engaging for the best talent, and it can convince them to stay here. And if more people, talented people, will stay here who are opinionated about certain values, then we have the better chance to change these things.
I also hope, and I also see it, but I'm not sure what the end result would that be of that discussion. But there was a discussion kicked off on a political level through or by Mario's Draghi report. I think now more and more decision makers in the institutions are actually looking more into the role that innovation and then technology ventures are going to play in strengthening European competitiveness. And I hope that this will affect also the institutions on a national level, and we will have, hopefully at some point, also more competent decision makers on that level, because quite often I don't think that they want to work against us. I think they just don't understand our bubble.
Yeah, right now actually there is a new innovation agency, innovation ministry, which is organizing this kind of startup roundtable discussions where they strive to get feedback from the market, and we've been an active part of it. Through that, we were able to do the ESOP and convertible regulation change that I mentioned. Through that, I think we could influence that the government should tweak down the funding programs and focus more on the regulatory side.
Yeah.
So, yeah, even if we don't agree with the government on many things and values, we can still help them to do better. And yeah.
Yeah,
That's
well,
how
we
we do.
don't need to agree so that we actually work together. That's
Yeah.
yes. And which are the initiatives of Startup Hungary that you're now most excited about?
Well, I'm pretty proud of our flagship monthly meetup series, which is happening on every first Monday of the month. It's called First Monday.
It's good.
We were able to, actually, it has a big tradition in Hungary. There was a OG community builder much before me,
Yeah.
called Peter Zaboi. He unfortunately passed away more than 10 years ago, I think, now. And he had this meetup series, First Monday, which was kind of iconic back then, and we brought it back. And today, like this week, actually this Monday, we had the Shaper founder. Next week, a partner from 20 VCs coming. Just a couple of months ago, we invited the co-founder of Bolt from Tallinn. So we always try to bring in like very high, very top-notch, top-tier international speakers also, and also like many of the local champions announced their big rounds. So when Colossian raised the A or when Sion raised the B, it was that platform where they announced it. So it kind of became like a default meeting point for the local ecosystem. Everybody is pretty much there. I think from the past 3 years, like I'm not exaggerating that 70% of the pre-seed and seed rounds, the investors and the companies met at that event.
Yeah.
So it kind of has this matchmaking effect. That makes me proud. Of course, we run a bunch of other events, so I'm overall proud of my team and the volume of events that we are able to deliver. To be contributing a little bit of this EU Inc. project with the organizing the launch event was also, I consider it as a big achievement. Just the fact that we expanded the funder board and convinced these more experienced funders to chip in financially and to have our budget 30% covered from these. It's also a great
It is a great success, yes.
achievement, I think, which makes me proud, and it's very important to be able to keep our independence.
Yes.
Actually, what I'm very excited about, and that's not yet an achievement, but now that the SCAT program that I'm doing is finishing, I'm actually raising a small fund under the umbrella of Startup Hungary, because we have been always exploring and discovering what is the business model that we can use to grow our bandwidth and to make the organization more financially stable, so we don't just rely on donations and sponsorships. And we've been, contemplating to do EU projects, but I don't want to do EU projects. We should do innovation for corporate. I don't want to do that. That's innovation theater. That's all just, that's noise and distraction, and it's not really aligned with our core mission to have more and better startups. And this scout opportunity, what I was doing in parallel to the community building, made me realize that this is it. We have the access, we have the edge through our community work to see the potential winners earlier than anybody else. So right now, we figured out a structure to raise like a small investment vehicle, primarily from the exited funders, so no institutional LPs, almost entirely funder backed. We can create a structure where the NGO can benefit from the carry share and also the management fee, which can create long-term financial stability and also increase our bandwidth on the short run. So this is what we are about to set up next year.
Wow, this is actually really exciting, because this is also how you actually have skin in the game. You are, defending, or you are supporting the ecosystem, but with skin in the game. I think this is something that we have been considering also at the Recursive. Yeah, it totally makes sense at some point, to support founders in their growth, but also to do it partially with financial incentive. And the way that I have figured it out is that yes, it makes sense, but if we manage to be sustainable, because running a fund is a long-term venture, it takes at least 10 years,
Yeah.
which means that we also as a media company need to be very, very confident that we'll exist more than 10 years in order to be able to have a financial success also with a VC fund. But it is definitely the fairest model that I have come up with for a media company like ours, which is very niche, and it totally makes sense also for Startup Hungary or for similar organizations.
Totally.
I love it. Happy to support you, happy to learn more about that. I think it's an exciting way to approach community work. Yeah. And maybe this could be a model that can be replicated also in different countries.
Yeah. Actually, we took a lot of inspiration of Czech funders and the Czech funders VC, which is doing similar stuff in Prague. They also started as an NGO, then kind of spun out early stage VC fund. And it kind of makes sense that in my head, this is like we inspire aspiring entrepreneurs, ex-operators through our public events and our content marketing. Then when they become startups, they can join our membership programs, our workshop. We can help them find investors. And now we can also invest. Why they grow and reach like Series A, Series B, we can recruit them to join our senior funder board and start giving back through mentorship or even investing in our next fund. So this kind of circle closes itself, and if we do a good job, it will take off, and everything is kind of in synergy with each other.
Yes.
If that makes sense. And there are also great, examples and role models in terms of combining media, community, and venture. We can talk about. I mentioned next month we have 20 VC partner. I think it's a great example. Currently, one of the hottest fund in Europe, started by a teenager guy as a podcast. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, true. Exciting. Well, thank you for this conversation. Good luck with your new ventures and new adventures. I'm sure that we will stay in touch. I'm also grateful that you helped us also organize this opening and this launch of Puzzle here in Budapest. I hope that this will be also yet another space where the community can gather, can thrive, can celebrate their successes and think of the next solutions of problems that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see the new stars emerging out from these walls.
Yeah. Thank you, Csongor.
Thank you.
And if you're just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.